Stalker Clear Sky is the awkward middle child of the series. It didn't get all the love and attention the firstborn received, and didn't benefit from all the experience the third installment enjoys. Clear Sky appears to be the excitement of having a first success, and wanting to follow it up quickly to maintain momentum, and in many ways, Clear Sky makes admirable strides for the Stalker series, but ultimately, it begins to falter under its own weight, and I suspect the weight of its grand expectations. Stalker Clear Sky is the second installment in the cult classic Stalker series. It's a prequel, so its events take place before those of Shadow of Chernobyl. If you've come from my last video hoping to see the story continue, I'm afraid you'll have to wait a little longer before I get to the third. If you haven't, link in the description, as I will reference Shadow of Chernobyl as we go, and make some comparisons between the games. This is your spoiler warning. Stalker Clear Sky released in August of 2008, just 17 months after Shadow of Chernobyl, which is a hell of a turnaround time, and it is somewhat noticeable in the storytelling, new system implementation, and general feel of Clear Sky, which we'll touch on as we get through this story and video. Thank you for checking out this video. Today we are once again exploring the open world, atmospheric first-person shooter series Stalker. We'll be breaking down the second game, Clear Sky, to understand its story, system design, moment-to-moment gameplay, and look into how it continues to build out this fantastic alternate universe and answer the question, does it hold up? Stalker Clear Sky fills an interesting role in the overall Stalker mythos and story. We know from Shadow of Chernobyl that Strelok had made it to the center of the zone before the events of the game began, and he falls off that death truck miraculously alive, but with no memory. We know he was essentially captured and then released into the world to track and kill a target, which ended up being himself, a mistake made by C consciousness. But we never did get answers as to how Strelok made it to the center of the zone, and how he was stopped to be reprogrammed in the first place. Clear Sky's addition to the series gives us some answers to this question, and introduce a host of new game systems, some of which are welcome additions, and others unusual choices. So let's dive in. As before, I'll run my way through the entire story, we'll see all cutscenes, although there are fewer in the second game, and I'll present all major story beats while breaking down the game's multiple systems, including its newly introduced Faction Wars mechanic. Starting out, we again get the great menu music, and a view of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant through a hole in what looks like a hollowed out aircraft. We've gone from being inside a broken building in Shadow of Chernobyl to a hollowed out plane. An upgrade? I found the Stalker difficulty to be a little easy in my playthrough of Shadow of Chernobyl, but I'm going to pick it for consistency, and again choose the same. This ends up being a wise choice in Clear Sky, as combat has been rebalanced in a number of ways. Enemies have better aim, player accuracy is reduced, but can be increased through another system that modifies weapons, and maybe the most questionable experience, all enemy factions have recruited directly from what I can only assume is Russia's booming base wall industry. Their pinpoint accuracy with grenades, we will explore as we go on. As we start up, we get the following cutscene.
In actual fact, we have nothing to worry about. According to our research, the next emission will not occur for at least 2 months, 4 days, and 7 hours. Its intensity will be 3 on the Bergman scale, which is 2.13.
A lone stalker guiding a group of scientists through a swamp-like area. I'm already loving the cinematics again. They're simple, to the point, and always present the world as a drab and dreary place. Suddenly, mutated animals begin running in the opposite direction. They do always say animals can sense a change in the weather, and this one's a doozy. What looks like a wall of fire and lightning hits the group, and we fade to white. Coming back to reality, we overhear 2 unknown people running through what happened. We're told our character has suffered damage to our nervous system, but that all other indicators are great. We learn that the Great Wall of Fire was something called an emission, which caused these changes to us, and we wake up. We see a dilapidated building. That computer over there clearly has the blue screen of death, and our character has the audacity to ask if this is heaven. We don't know anything about this guy yet, but if I ever wake up in a building without part of its wall and a computer that wouldn't be able to play Doom, I'm absolutely assuming I'm in hell, because that ain't my heaven. I'm not spending my eternal rest without some kind of top tier PC.
Whoa, RGB epic!
We learn after the mission, we were taken in by a group called S.T.A.L.K.E.R, who found me in the swamp, about to be eaten by pseudo dogs. We're told this older gentleman is busy and he leaves us to our own devices. Odd to just show up as we wake and bail, but sure, let's stumble around the camp and get our bearings. The world looks beautiful as always. A drab mix of muted colours indicating it's a rough part of the world, but the sun shines through brightly, and the sounds of the camp are alive. We stumble our way to the barkeep named Cold, who sets the scene for this group. It's not a well-known faction because they want it that way. We're given the names of the group leader, nearby trader and technician, and we're quickly sent back to talk to the guy who told us he was a bit too busy. The leader of the S.T.A.L.K.E.R faction, Lebedev. I'm going to butcher names, you're just going to have to deal with it. Lebedev here tells us that we're in the S.T.A.L.K.E.R base, and tells us not to try and remember who they are because we've never heard of them. S.T.A.L.K.E.R don't want to be known. Their only goal is to research, and they are not adept in combat, so they hide out here in the swamp to avoid the quarrelling for land among the other factions. I like this. In the first game, the factions in the zone are in a tense truce in many instances, or in all-out war against one another. No one faction is fond of the other. If they aren't actively fighting one another, the peace between them is fragile. A group of researchers would be prime targets, so it makes sense that they would want to remain hidden. In Shadow of Chernobyl, we actively see some researchers attacked by mercenaries, so I get it. We're told the group were developing a good picture of the zone until the emission that brought us here. It changed everything, and swept across the entire zone. Areas that were safe before are now filled with radiation. Anomalies have appeared in new, unexpected places, and some paths are now full of danger. The fragile peace between factions has now completely disintegrated, and there is all-out war. Not between everyone, but each faction is now pushing for land and resources against those who have opposing views, or are just nearby. Despite all that, Lebedev is most impressed by the fact we survived. We asked to leave, and we're told, well, this place is a secret, so what are we going to do with you? We're also informed that with the changes to the zone, the swamp has become much more accessible, and bandits have begun to swarm in, and S.T.A.L.K.E.R are losing ground. A real catch-22 for this faction. They want to be hidden, and releasing this unknown entity that is me into the zone with the knowledge of this base could be a problem. As we're talking, an emergency broadcast comes in saying that an outpost is under attack.
This is the second outpost. We're under attack. I repeat, we're under attack. Help!
Lebedev asks if we remember how to survive in the zone, and if this isn't a setup for a tutorial, I don't know what is. We grab some equipment from the local trader and ask a guide to take us to the outpost under attack. The S.T.A.L.K.E.R base is unique in that it isn't a location you can walk to in the world like any other. It is instead hidden away, which is lore friendly, and you require a guide to get you in and out of the location. I like this because it forces you to interact with guides who act in part as a fast travel system for the game. It's not a free roam system. I can't fast travel from one side to the other. Guides will only be able to take you to certain locations, usually somewhat nearby, but by forcing me to use them, I become aware of this as an option. Now, I broke down Stalker's control system in my first video on the series, so I won't rehash everything, but there are some key changes. We have our life and armor status bars again by our ammo. We have indicators on damage types, including radiation and psi damage. The very bottom right has our stamina bar, and the white section here will show how much radiation we've taken on if we walk into a radiated area. Again, our map up the top left shows the number of humans in the vicinity, with a number in the bottom right of it, and we also have quest pointers this time around showing us which direction to head in. Now, one small change to artifacts in Clear Sky is that you now need to stumble on top of them to see them, different to that of the first game, in which they would be visible from miles away. You now need a detector, which will beep as you get closer, and on getting to the location your artifact will pop up. Later on, I got a sweet new detector that showed a screen and mark to find, although this did feel a little inaccurate. Almost like I have to stand on the location for a few seconds before the artifact actually pops, which is a frustration when you're standing in radiation or very close to anomalies. As a result of this change, I saw significantly less artifacts as I played, but I do like it. It makes artifact hunting an actual task and something to engage in. You actually need to get close to the danger to find what you're after, rather than being able to see it from safety and make the choice there. This is a solid change. It adds more mystery to the game. As we approach our mission, we can see in the top left that only one person is left alive, before we are suddenly rear-ended by a boar. Yeah, I'm fine with that line staying in. Factually accurate. We're told to make a run for the tower and find a lone stalker holding out against the boars. This is a stock standard tutorial, and oddly enough, as I'm taking shots at boars, I notice they changed the aim down sight for the pistols. What an odd change. For context, here it is in Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl, straight down the sight, and in Clear Sky, it's a slight zoom in. Why? It's small, but after coming from one game to another relatively quick, it felt a little bit odd. And suddenly, another emission. We're told to get the fuck out, and our mate here just falls over at the mere thought of it. I try to run for cover, but don't you worry, this is just a scripted end to the tutorial. I don't hate a little self-contained tutorial like this, but I'd prefer to learn in the open world than in a small structured zone I can't revisit. Shadow of Chernobyl had us doing small quests around its beginning area, and this worked really well, so I'm surprised we don't get just releasing the open world to start. As we awake back in the Clear Sky base, Lebedev tells us he's not even surprised we survived the emission, and I've clearly acquired some kind of unusual power to survive these harmful occurrences. As he begins telling me that I'm basically a superhuman now, we also get our kryptonite. Each emission is steadily harming us, and if too many occur, we will die. Now, this doesn't actually lead to any in-game mechanics, it's just set dressing to give our character a reason to help this faction on our common goal of understanding these emissions. We learn that emissions are based on the accumulated energy in the zone, and he likens them to a human body fighting off a virus. He mentions that the zone tolerates humans in some areas but not others. Anything beyond the brain scorcher is off limits, and he believes that someone has broken that limit, which is resulting in these harsher emissions. Now, if you didn't watch my first video, then let me break down some backstory that's relevant. The zone was created by interference with the Earth's noosphere, a sphere that holds all of the subconscious thoughts of the Earth's beings. A scientifically created sea consciousness, the mixed consciousness of 7 scientists, created the zone accidentally while trying to alter this noosphere. But it was never stated that the sea consciousness could create emissions to push people away from the zone. The brain scorcher was created by sea consciousness to keep people out and away from the center, and in some cases is used to mind control those who get too close. You'd either become a lifeless husk or become programmed to carry out a task. I hope we get some kind of explanation about how these emissions occur, because if they are controlled by sea consciousness, I don't understand why they weren't used to prevent Strelok from reaching the center earlier, in Game 1. There's a few points that Clear Sky raises that seem to be contradictions of the first game story, and I'll mention these as I see them. Lebedev tells us we need to go to Cordon and speak to Sidorovich, so we can work on finding out who it is getting into the center of the zone and causing these emissions. Clear Sky believe the zone is trying to keep stalkers out, but some rash group is ignoring this. I'll give you a moment to guess who that might be. Strelok's group? The Muppet Squad. One of those bears on a small bicycle. Yeah, it's Strelok's group. This being a prequel, and I've already touched on it, we're learning about how they got in. But before we can get to Cordon, we need to help Clear Sky with their fight against the bandits, and to be able to reach the path needed to get out of the swamp. Now, this is a decent introduction to the faction war mechanic in Clear Sky, and this is one I have fond memories of, and I've actually been quite excited to return to it. As we're being released to the open world, we have our task. Help Clear Sky fighters across the Great Swamp in their fight against the renegades that are encroaching on the area. We get a few key missions on our way through to take points of interest, but let's break down this mechanic as I remember it blowing my mind when Clear Sky was first released. If you have no familiarity with Stalker and didn't watch my first video, the TLDR, or I guess the too long didn't watch, is that within the zone are a number of groups with their own goals, beliefs, and reason for being, and they're often at odds with one another. In this instance, Clear Sky want to be left in peace and study and understand the zone. The renegades just want their shit, and likely to search for artifacts in the area to sell. Now in Clear Sky, groups of stalkers, bandits, military, and so on will move between different areas as groups fight over strategic locations. In 2008, this was an awesome system to play with, as not that many open worlds had their NPC factions actively moving around the world, engaging with one another and having fights. So we have groups of renegades trying to take farmsteads, churches, and locations in the area, and Clear Sky defending them, and then also pushing forward. I've always been fond of games having their NPCs interact with one another in line with rules the world sets out, and seeing it in action used to make the world feel so incredibly immersive. This is still the case in many ways for Clear Sky, and as we play I run into some good examples of this, feeling natural to the world, but the system does show its age. And having been a teenager playing this back in the day, my expectations and my ability to dissect what's happening at a system level did start to show the cracks in the faction war system. I did have fun with it, but at times it was painfully obvious what was happening to the AI. Groups of stalkers and bandits will often walk lifelessly between locations. If a group has been wiped out, that doesn't stop them continuing to progress on. At one point, I had a single stalker walking to a location with 10 or more enemies, and sadly, he wasn't the John Wick of this universe.
Hello there.
I still had fun with this mechanic, although in many instances it requires you to side with a faction. Duty and Freedom are factions at war we meet later, and while you interact more with Freedom and Clear Sky, if you decide to support them in some areas, that will put you at odds with Duty. Where this system ultimately begins to come apart in Clear Sky is that factions are generally stronger or weaker than the other in their natural state. And it became increasingly obvious to me that in many instances, if I wasn't there to turn the tide, the weaker faction would have been decimated, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. This can give you a sense that you have agency and outcomes for the world. But as I came across a group of stalkers in the next zone, I arrived just in time to see the last fighter absolutely stomped by the military. Like watching a group of toddlers try to take on a UFC fighter, it was a massacre. Having made it to the other side of the Great Swamp, after a few battles, we're ready to get out of this world and back into Corden. One of the first game's central locations. Clear Sky was able to release so quickly after Shadow of Chernobyl due to most areas being reused, with differing enemy locations, anomalies in new areas, and the variety of faction wars mixing it up. This could be seen as a lazy design choice, and maybe in some ways it was, but it also makes sense, especially for a prequel. We know Strelok traveled through these areas to get to the center of the zone, so from a story perspective, having new areas throughout the whole game wouldn't have made much sense. And despite traveling through the same areas, the mixing of faction locations and a number of brand new locations do make this work. But just as we're getting onto a good note, watch this.
I haven't seen anyone come from the swamps in a long while. You've come out right next to the army outpost. There's only one thing a stalker can expect from the army, and that's a bullet. So I'd be careful if I were you.
A quick bit of context here. There is nothing to the right, and this fence right here to my left, this little barbed wire fence, that's an impassable object, so I have to walk around that. Yeah, just thought I'd let you know. This is the only entrance into Corden. I stress, the only entrance at this point from the Great Swamp. That right there is a military outpost. Aggressive, not friendly. And we need to run at it, and then dip to the left as hard as we can. What the fuck were they thinking with this interaction? Perhaps the idea is that I was supposed to come at night time? Maybe I could have snuck through easier if it was dark? And boy, I'll tell you about the day-night cycle soon. This section remains a bit of a meme in the Stalker community. I looked over some reviews for the game and on discussion boards, and there was often occasional references to the military gunning you down at the start. I am able to make it through on our second attempt, but it does serve as a health kit check. I had to spam heal to make it through to the other side. But ultimately, this hardship was well worth it, as we've been sent to meet our main man, the one, the only, Papa Sid. This glorious, greasy man. Now, this is the only time we actually get to see Papa Sid throughout our playthrough.
Bullshit. You're lying.
Let the zone take me if I am.
Shadow of Chernobyl does an admirable job at having players return to their quest givers pretty often, whereas in Clear Sky, it's more of a straight line, although all the side quests and the faction war system, there is more for players to do. Papa Sid tells us the local military who gunned us down as we entered Corden are now actively fighting stalkers in the area, and vice versa. That fragile peace in the zone is gone. This sets up more of the faction war in this area, explaining to veteran players why it isn't as peaceful as in Shadow of Chernobyl. The emissions destabilizing the zone is a good set piece for the world and really outlines a solid foundation for why the world is in such a different state. Papa Sid won't give us any information without something in return. You glorious fat fucker, never change. We're told that the stalkers nearby have captured the military commander, and are keeping him hostage, so we're sent off to go have a chat and find out the location of Sidorovich's package. We find Father Valerian at the old farmstead, and by that name, I'm surprised he wasn't an extra in Game of Thrones. We're told that the agreement between the Stalkers and the military was that they could transport goods out of the zone for a cost, and as free market capitalism goes, this was a fine deal. But the military were also selling information on Stalker's whereabouts to the bandits, and even sold 2 of them as slaves. Later on, we do actually see some Stalkers, unarmed, walking around the garbage near armed bandits. This is some really good world building. I like that this isn't just a throwaway line about Stalkers being used to search the garbage. You can actually see it in action, and choose to intervene or leave them to their new lives as artifact hunters under the bandits' thumb. Our Holy Father tells us that they kidnapped the commander and are in a Mexican standoff with the military. If they kill him, the military helicopters will come soaring in. If they release him, they're likely in the same boat as he'll want revenge, and the commander knows it, and is the only one who knows where Sid's loot is. We walk up to the commander, and yeah, he won't give a shit. No surprise there. But he does give us some great character motivation. Reading through his dialogue, the Major is a broken man. Disillusioned by his time in the military, he sees others making money from the zone, the endless cruelty he and his men experience fighting back mutants, and seeing the top brass spin the news to meet their interests. The Major decided to make an extra buck, and makes no apologies for it. A true arsehole, but one I could understand. The best villains are ones with clear motivations, and while the Major here isn't a game villain directly, he has motivations beyond the generic military versus Stalker situation. We tell the father we had no luck, and find out the commander owes his military buddies some money, which is why they're so keen on getting him back. So we can't expect them to abandon him, but if we can eliminate these interested parties, the rest of the military may decide he's a lost cause, without the personal interests of his friends. We're tasked with taking out these buddies who are nearby, and just so happen to be the group that massacred the Stalker group from earlier on, when I explained the faction war mechanic. While clearing out these groups to find the commander's friends, I start to notice the differences in the gunplay further. Once again, the starting guns have awful accuracy, but it somehow feels less accurate to me, but more accurate for the enemies, almost like we have different rules, but it may be that there is differences in the damage I do versus what I receive, which wouldn't be unusual. There is also more weight and inertia to the movement of weapons. If I scope in while moving, there is some slight misalignment between my gun and my direct view. This was jarring at first, but meant I had to slow down in some combat scenarios. And on reloading, there is a slight blur effect, which I quite like. Having come straight from Shadow of Chernobyl, which has none of this, and after the initial oddity of the changes, I'm coming to enjoy the combat much more. But later on, we'll run into some interesting quirks, as enemies and allies are now much more likely to use their grenades. Enemy AI is still basic, but overall, there are minor improvements. The grenade thing will become its own worst enemy as we get to the final mission. After clearing out both military camps, we return to the commander, and without his friends, he immediately falters.
See what being stubborn gets you? Your friends are dead and you're still here. No one's coming to save you. Tell me where you hid the case.
Okay, I tell you, bastards. It's at the old mill, under the roof.
Would you look at that? The little shit cracked like an egg. The stash coordinates are in your PDA. Take what you find to Sidorovich. He's waiting.
It turns out that the loot has been under our noses the whole time, just at the top of the old mill. So you go, pick it up, and ferry it back to old Sidorovich. Sid tells us that a stalker named Fang had come by looking for niche components. He was able to sell him an amp, but didn't have exactly what he needed, and told Fang to go check out the garbage, an area littered with old equipment from the nuclear plant. This is technically our first sign that we're chasing down Strelok's group. If you hadn't played the first game, Fang is part of Strelok's crew, and it sounds like they're looking for components to help them get to the center as Clear indicated. So we saddle up and make our way. On our way, we discover that this game has a day-night cycle. The previous game did not. So what does this mean? Well, it means the next 30 minutes of my footage look like this. There is no way, and I repeat, no way to skip through the night. I went looking at sleeping bags and beds. No, I googled it, and no. You must make it through the night. Now, I don't have insomnia, but our mercenary sure does. I don't mind a day-night cycle, and I really enjoyed slowly watching the light die and then return in the morning. It's done incredibly well from a visual perspective. But I'm not a massive fan of having no choice in the matter. If I'd prefer to skip night gameplay, I'd like to have that choice and be able to sleep through it, and I'm surprised that doesn't exist. Looking online, there are mods that add this, but for us, the choices here are sit in town for 30 minutes or power through. So we continue on. A funny sight as we enter the garbage, we are robbed at gunpoint the moment we enter and lose all of our cash. Thankfully, we kind of had fuck all, and they aren't interested in any of our other items, but I will remember this. I love that in Shadow of Chernobyl, we watched a stalker get robbed in this exact location, and then it happens to us. It's a beautiful irony, as I didn't help that stalker in my original playthrough. Another change for Clear Sky as well, is that the bandits in this location are a neutral party. They're not immediately hostile to you. They won't cause you problems. I mean, I was just robbed, but from now on they won't cause me problems. Well, we'll see about that. We can visit their main hub and do missions for them as well, but we're here to find Fang. We find where he'd been searching for components and find a group of dead stalkers with a message. They weren't happy that Fang hadn't paid them up front, and one of them had gone off to find Fang and seek that payment.
We found in the cache. He wouldn't stop swearing and said he wouldn't pay us until we found the other components. We discussed it between ourselves and decided to send Vasya to speak to him. Vasya is one silver-tongued son of a gun. We figured he might be able to talk Fang into paying us at least some of the money. I just hope he doesn't run into trouble on the way there.
As we go searching, we do find an active PDA and a stalker, who's standing on a rock scared of a dog attack. Dogs start to swarm the area, and being nighttime it's a little hard to see them, but we help the guy survive, and the stalker tells us he was just behind Fang. We must be close. Fang will be somewhere in the Dark Valley, so let's go find him. Traveling into the Dark Valley, we're again held at gunpoint. I swear to God if I am robbed again. But no, it's just some guys from Freedom. As the events of Clear Sky take place before Shadow of Chernobyl, the bases of various factions are sometimes in different areas, and Freedom have set up here in the Dark Valley. But they tell us they've been under constant attack with no warning, and they're starting to get really paranoid. As we're being held up at gunpoint, an emergency broadcast comes in, and we rush over to check it out. As we arrive at the location, we're attacked by a group of blind dogs again. Is this some kind of mutant overrun area, or did the dogs also get attracted to local gunfire? I guess we'll just have to find out by doing more menial tasks for this new group who are holding information above our heads. Now, don't get me wrong, it does make sense. If you want something from someone in the zone, you better believe you're working for it or paying a hefty sum. But so far, each new area has been an effort in, hey, your man is here. Ah, you just missed him. But tell you what, kill that dog and write me a 50-page essay on why you're a cheeky little breaky, and we'll tell you what you want to know. So we get on with our tasks, to kill a dog, find missing squads, and get to the bottom of these random attacks on Freedom. As we are moseying around the base, I appreciate that this faction is more fleshed out in Clear Sky. Freedom are your stoners of the zone. They lack the discipline of duty and dislike everything they stand for. Freedom want to live and let live, and have everyone who wants to be in the zone come on in. And their lack of discipline can be heard beautifully in the broadcasts, taking place within their compound.
Yo, A-Shot, we get a lock frame over here or what?
That will be $20.
You cheapskate. Alright, get him from the commandant.
I praise the OG Stalker for its world building. These factions are all looking to recruit in most cases, so of course, as people come through their bases, they're likely to stop in, assuming they're a neutral or friendly party, so it makes sense that they would want to broadcast something to try and bring these people on board. As we're completing tasks in the area, we locate another group of dead freedom fighters, and learn from a PDA that the Freedom Commander has been selling them out. Another betrayal. And before he could be located, he fled to a mercenary compound nearby. And given we've helped them in understanding the attacks, we're given our information. Fang has already left and returned to the garbage. It feels like if we were that close behind him after the Stalker with the dog attack, that we should have crossed paths, but how else would we continue the plot? We do, however, have his PDA frequency, so we can track him now. Before we head off, I do decide to complete another mission for Freedom, which involves activating some local antenna so they can better track what is happening in the Dark Valley. I won't bother showing off too much of it, as it's a lot of just me shooting mercenaries, but I did this to get some extra cash, in the hopes I can get a shiny new suit soon. So with that thought, I have earned a tidy sum, we return to the garbage. We locate a small Stalker encampment that is the location of Fang's PDA. After looking around a little bit, we get led to a small door, and on entering...
This place is pretty damn good. Look at all these stalkers charging in here like flies to honey. I wonder what they're after.
It's too bad that punk got away.
Screw him. He dropped his shit. That's all that matters.
Yeah, let's grab the best stuff and get the hell out of here.
You motherfuckers. I'm robbed. Again. So much for earning some money. And this time they take everything, down to my last moldy sausage. We do find Fangs PDA, however, and a message from an unknown stalker, someone in Fangs' group. They're onto us. They know they're being tracked, and he's heading to the group's hideout. We get a small message from Lebedev. All our suspicions have been confirmed. Stalkers have made it to the center of the zone. Lebedev continues to be convinced that the increased emissions are the zone trying to keep them out, so let's chase. They know we're coming, so they'll want to get out quick. We need to be faster. But in saying that, we know where the thieves are that took our stuff, so we get some sweet revenge and all of our loot back. But not our money. I guess that was in their other trench coat. Now, getting robbed once was fine. Kind of funny. Being robbed twice, with no way to get our money back, is a bit of a sting. I have mainlined the quests pretty heavily, which meant I'd earned the bare minimum, and I had spent some on supplies. If I'd done a lot of side content and saved up a lot of money up to now, I would have been pissed. The first robbery I could have avoided by shooting first. The second is a set piece with no options to avoid it. At the point those bandits take my loot and find Fangs PDA, if you have money, spend it. Because you cannot avoid that interaction and you cannot get your cash back. This is an odd design choice. For an open world game that tried to expand on player choice, why have them rob me without recourse? Why not give me my money back when the party that robbed me died? It feels like a rushed system implemented but not fully fleshed out. It also means if I want to spend time in this area, I likely need to make enemies with the bandits to prevent it. Or join them in completing a number of missions to make them friendly, but that's not something I want to do. Oh, and the worst part? As I'm trying to leave, I get robbed again. Yes, again. But sucks to be you, buddy. I have $0 on me. I wish there was an interaction in this moment. A simple player has $0, bandit makes fun of you, piece of code could have added to this. But he acts like he got me, so we continue on. As a sign of rebellion, on my way out, I quickly tap one in the head and leave. I told myself if I came back to the garbage, I would be slaughtering all of them. But this is the last time we stepped foot in that hellhole, so, you know, I got robbed 3 times. But who's the real winner here? It's definitely the bandits. They fucked me. On our way to find Fang's hideout, we meet Judy, who controlled the area housing the Agroprom Research Institute. They suggest to me that we should move as a group to their outpost because mutants are really active in the area. So far on entry into each new location, we've been hit with some kind of set piece. I do enjoy this, but in Clear Sky they are requirements which, while adding to the world, also remove me from it. The original Stalker put set pieces in front of you, and rarely would it require you to engage with them. While I don't have to walk with these men here, I was slightly disappointed that the bloodsucker that kidnaps this gentleman is clearly not present in the world. It's an invincible set piece, and while it was cool to watch them jump away, I've been disconnected from the world. I just watched 30 bullets go into this animal and it didn't react. It's a very small gripe, but when a game is open world, I'd much prefer a lackluster event in which I kill the bloodsucker before it even gets close than this. It reminds me of the mission in the first game in which my scientist died and the game just continued, even though I failed the mission, and I had to deal with the consequences. Give me a world that reacts to me, not one that flashes events I can't interact with. Arriving at the Judy base, the commander tells us that since the emissions, mutants have been pouring out of the underground at an alarming rate, and our boy needs to get in there. So Judy offered to go clear it out for us and roll out the red carpet. Nah. Of course, we are a one-man army. We've been told to clear those tunnels and activate the pump to flood them. Of course, we're going to get very little support here, but some of the Judy guys do end up clearing the entrance for us, and most die in the process. The underground is a dangerous place. Snorks and fire anomalies everywhere. I'm not sure if this was supposed to be a section I sprinted through quickly, but fighting the Snorks slows me down so much that the fire anomalies catch up to me, but I can crouch under them, so it's not the end of the world. The fire anomalies mean our detector is rapidly going off, much like I imagine Papa Sid's heart rate increases as he wolfs down his 3rd mutated boar leg of the day. Which is a shame, because I always loved and lovingly hated the sound design underground. The eerie noises of enemies, anomalies popping and cracking, the world around making slight noises. This is just non-stop blast. As we enter the pump room though, we get the ambience I was missing. The squeaking of lights flickering, the pump struggling, a controller begins to attack us, causing that wonderful ear-piercing tone that tells us this thing has managed to give us a concussion, with its mind and clear hearing loss. Thankfully, and those who watch my verse video will know, a controller's weakness continues to be corners. Poor things. Got all these awesome psychic powers, but they're about as smart as a toddler playing peekaboo. No object permanence. Completely loses track of me as I walk around these pipes. Hiding behind some of the terrain, we're able to bring it down easily and get the pipes turned on. We get a timer and wade through waves of mutated rats I've never seen before and escape to the underground near Fangs' Hideout. This is an area we've been to before, but is slightly different. Now, there are a few bandits in here, so I get some much sought after revenge and we're able to locate the hideout itself. In there, we find a recorded message. Strelok talking to Ghost and Fang, two of his crew. Strelok mentions that others know about their success and they need to move quickly. Ghost says he's hidden the decoders near the Brain Scorcher, and Strelok says he is going to get a device to make his way past it. This is Strelok saying he's going to the center for the second time. The first time, they went underground, but this is no longer an option. Lebedev contacts us, he knows where Strelok is going. The device he is seeking is located in Lake Yantar, not far away. He's desperate to stop more emissions, and given our lives are tied to them, so are we. As we're exiting the underground, a pyrogeist is lighting up this stairwell, and I hit some kind of invisible force, likely just a small game bug, possibly a box that got destroyed, went invisible and blocked my path. I can't imagine a more horrifying death, stuck standing in fire with no clue why you're unable to move. Thankfully, I'd saved just moments earlier, so we lose about 20 seconds of progress in total. It's at this point I'm starting to respect our character's motivations. I hadn't mentioned till now, but our character is called S.T.A.L.K.E.R, a mercenary who existed in the zone doing odd jobs before that emission both made us powerful and fucked us up. But what I'm noticing is missing is any kind of evidence we existed here prior. No one we've met has ever crossed paths with us before, and we suddenly have no motivation other than catching Strelok to prevent further emissions. I think what we're missing throughout Clear Sky is a short side mission or set piece that gives us more information on exactly who we were before the emission. Strelok in Shadow of Chernobyl had amnesia, which was later partially explained and allowed us to experience the zone with fresh eyes. S.T.A.L.K.E.R should have some existence in the world prior to this story beginning, and it's a shame we don't get to experience that. As we head towards Yantar, we find a group of zombie stalkers and a group of alive stalkers just trying to make it through. We help them out and we get a nice fancy stalker suit. Actually a pretty solid reward for the little help we provided. I guess we didn't need that extra cash the bandits took, just some goodwill. The fighting in Yantar really has me noticing the bullet spray. It feels more wild than in Shadow of Chernobyl, and the enemy animations, like all things Stalker, are a bit off. One moment this zombie is acting tactically and crouching, and then suddenly bolt upright and wandering. I assume this is some leftover randomness in how they've been coded to fight. The lack of accuracy now means I need to get fairly close in to get reliable headshots, and we should start investing in those weapon upgrades more. But I'm still occasionally swapping out guns and don't want to heavily invest at this point. After clearing up the riffraff outside, we meet the Professor. Now this to me is a major plot hole, and maybe I'm not getting it. If you know the Stalker lore well, feel free to tell me in the comments if I'm wrong. But in the first game, spoilers again, but if you're this deep in the video, I'd be surprised if you cared. And actually, let me take a moment to thank you for watching this. If you're enjoying the video, throw me a like, subscribe to see part 3, Call of Pripyat, the final game, and I'll catch you in the comments. Now, back to this hole that needs filling. Actually, again, before I rant, I'll tell you what's happening and let it play because the context is necessary. Strelok had been here before us, and the Professor mentions that he knew far more than others did about how the psi missions worked. The Professor didn't believe the claims Strelok had been to the center of the zone, despite Strelok showing him pictures that he'd allegedly taken. I love the idea that Strelok just had selfies in front of the nuclear power plant. The lore tells us Strelok first found the secret room that leads to sea consciousness, but couldn't enter because he didn't have a decoder. I hope there is a photo of him there, near the wish granter, looking at it like he knows it's fake. The professor says he gave Strelok a prototype that should allow him to pass the brain scorcher, but it needs calibration, and they lost contact with Strelok after an emission hit. We're told with more data, he could probably help us too, and that a group of stalkers found some documents but got hit by the emission and died just outside. But with the area so hostile, no one has been able to reclaim them. So we set off, also noting that the nearby factory emits a signal that will turn your brain into mush during an emission, which causes the zombified stalkers we see nearby. Now, back to that hole. In Shadow of Chernobyl, we visit the professor as Strelok. So in the first game, we are Strelok, but we have amnesia, so we don't know who we are and we don't know who we've met previously. Now, the events of the first game don't happen that long after the events here in Clear Sky. I googled it, and the fan wiki suggests Clear Sky ends about 4 to 5 months before Strelok is found unconscious in Shadow of Chernobyl. So how does the professor not recognize us in Shadow of Chernobyl if Strelok had met him? Especially when he is fascinated by Strelok seemingly knowing a lot more than he should, and Strelok having claimed to have been there to the center, and then trusted with a psi-blocking device. It's just a bit too much. Unless I find out later in the lore that the professor here has dementia, with Clear Sky being developed after Shadow of Chernobyl, this seems like a story beat they just didn't know how to address, as they've retroactively messed with the events of the first game, and the only explanation is the professor doesn't recognize Strelok 5 months later, when he returns with the exact same mission. In both games, Strelok is trying to get past the brain scorcher with the professor's prototype. And in both games, the professor directly addresses Strelok and gives them an option to get past the brain scorcher. Either this guy is handing these out like candy, or he's got a really poor memory. It just feels so lazy, and such a weird choice. Fang could have been the one to collect the prototype. We know Ghost comes back here once Strelok takes off to the center in Shadow of Chernobyl. Strelok could have robbed it from someone else, or he could have gone with a group and taken it. It just seems odd that this character didn't recognize Strelok just a few months later. Now, if you aren't paying super close attention to the story, I guess it's easy to brush over, but I already felt Clear Sky's story was a little on the lazy side. Adding plot holes somewhat increases that feeling. Anyway, rant over. This feels like a symptom of Shadow of Chernobyl releasing and GSC wanting to rush out the next product. They likely didn't have the conclusion of the story completed, so they rushed together a prequel, but that's left me with more questions. We return the documents to the professor and discover that the psi emitter in the nearby factory is man-made and is creating localized emissions at an increased rate due to cooling problems. So we're sent in with a group of stalkers to fix this, so they can better study it in the future. This is a nice change of pace. Instead of being the guy sent solely to deal with this, we're a supporting character now, tagging along to help the group fix this cooling issue, which is needed for us to get to the next area, but we don't really know that yet. The zombies in this area are way less aggressive, more like your Walking Dead style zombies than the ones shooting us outside earlier. They do have guns, but they are way less aggressive. Maybe they got a little bit too melted by the psi emissions. We're given the task of sitting on the roof for close to 4 minutes, and we excel at sitting on roofs. Shooting zombies across the way is a bit of a challenge. We're reaching the stage of the game in which headshots are crucial to taking out enemies without needing copious amounts of ammo, but our gun is lacking just a little bit of accuracy. We need to be efficient at this. Thankfully, like the Russian army in World War II, these stalkers came prepared. When one falls, another steps in, grabs the gun, and carries on the fight. If, in this case, the gun is a console, which is located on a roof outside to a cooling system for something that is fairly far underground. I'm smelling another plot hole. Let's get out of here before it gets any bigger. On fixing the plant, the professor gets a better lock on Strelok. He's heading to the Red Forest, and we can follow him. So once again, we're right on his tail.
Hurry up! You're very close to Strelok.
And this time, being right on Strelok's tail was actually correct. There he is, in all his janky 2008 glory, running away from us. Strelok. This is a moment. The first time we're seeing him, and as we pursue, we're ambushed by a group of stalkers, and we die to a grenade we absolutely had every chance of escaping from. I'm sure that'll be a one-off and won't happen again. With the benefit of reincarnation, we come back and try with a little more range, and oh, that was a close one. On clearing the ambush, one of the stalkers surrenders and explosions can be seen coming from the tunnel. Strelok tells us over the radio he blew it up, and he'll be at the center of the zone before we know it, whatever it takes.
I blew up the tunnel. You will not stop me. I am going to reach the center of the zone, whatever it takes.
Strelok's signal is gone. We lost him. Event towards the Scorcher. And from there it's not far to the center of the zone. For us though, trying to get through the Scorcher without the scientist prototype would be suicide. Our only hope of catching Strelok is to go through Limansk. I know of a tunnel that leads there. It starts just beyond the bridge. This is the only way of reaching the city. The bridge can only be lowered from the other side, but that's bandit territory. Shit. There must be a way of getting across. Maybe there's another road to the other shore.
Lebedev tells us over the radio an old man named Forrester lives nearby, and he can find paths through the zone better than anyone. If we want another way to the center, he's our man. We interrogate the surrendered stalker, and he says he knows nothing of Strelok's plans, but can help us find Forrester. To find him, we have to go through the Red Forest, a location that is chock full of mutants. We're talking pseudo-dogs, snorks, your general blind dogs, and the fabled pseudo-giant. The giants in the first game we used sparingly and underwhelmingly, but this time, we see it from behind the bushes. It raises a leg. An arm? I don't know. It has two tree trunks it stands on, and it raises one just high enough for us to get a view. This thing is tank as all hell. It sends some of the group flying, and they won't be back. Then we find its weakness. Foliage, and enough bullets to kill 10 elephants. But the thing can't walk through this tree. Its textures are a little too texturous, and we're finally able to bring it down with only one stalker left alive. But with that, we basically made it through the forest. Up ahead there is a large group of snorks surrounding an anomaly that will teleport us where we need to go. How do we know it's going to take us where we need to go? Anyway, so I started blasting, and we jump in, because at this point, we've just killed a giant. With all the fucked up shit in the world, I don't know if I'd ever trust jumping into something like that. But at the same time, if it works, it works. Forrester is an old man living in this little tower. He tells us he's been around since before the nuclear disaster, and the following disaster that brought the zone into being. He refuses to leave because of one thing. Location, location, location. He loves this place. He was the caretaker for this forest and its animals before the disasters, and he won't have it any other way. Although, he admits he doesn't need to do much protecting, as the forest is such a threat now. Forrester shares that when the zone appeared, it had an impact on him as well. It changed him. He feels he has the power to feel his way through areas littered with dangerous anomalies, as a sixth sense. Where others would take a single misstep and die, this old man floats through the world because he can feel it in his bones. He says he knows there is a way past the tunnel Strelok destroyed, as bandits have been sighted on the other side of the bridge, so there must be a path. He tells us a group of mercenaries have been lost in, and I'll quote, looped space, and that we can help find them while he's looking for a path. Now, it's nighttime again, and not a great deal is happening, so we're going to move a little faster through Forrester's section. In order to locate these lost mercenaries, we go and find a group of their friends, who tell us to climb a local tower and see if we can get a radio signal. Those cheeky boys. When we get to the top, bloodsuckers are hovering around the bottom. But they can't use ladders, so suck it. Our accuracy is still a nightmare, but we're eventually able to cut them down, and we get the coordinates and bring them back to Forrester. He tells us he was once trapped in a similar anomaly, but that the zone, yep, the zone, gave him an artifact to get out. Something he called Compass, which is in a cave nearby with the bandits that robbed it from him. The zone really is being made out to be alive and almost conscious being in this installment, which is still not outside the realm of possibility. The zone was spawned from interference with the world's noosphere, the made-up sphere that contains influences on people. It is part of the world's cognition in general. If you have conscious thought, part of you inhabits this sphere. It'll be interesting to see if they try to answer any of this in Game 3, or if this is a lazier way of writing into the story that we have a problem and the mystery forest man has the solution. He's starting to sound a little like Gandalf. Some of the mysteries of the zone are pure mysteries, and they are supernatural in nature, so there is some inherent plot armor around this plot. While some of the zone's creations are man-made by sea consciousness, others could very well be real, like this old man's abilities or our own. Now, we're in our second night, and as you've seen, it's been pitch black for a while. And I learned how to free cam. Ooh, look at this B-roll. I don't want to float my boat, but this 1k sub count YouTuber is learning. Like watching a giraffe take its first steps, I'm able to fly through the bandit camp for some sweet footage before making my way in. We snatch the artifact back, and Forrester tells us we need a big enough transmitter to be able to send a message to get the mercenaries out of their loop. There is one in the military warehouse district, and thankfully, Freedom are also wanting the location. They're still buddies from all the help we gave them in Dark Valley, so we squad up, take out the local remaining military, maybe dial real quick and restart, and finish our mission.
We've received the coordinates and we're going to try to get out of the bubble. Okay, left here, 60 feet this way. Oh dang, we're free! You hear me? We made it out of the anomaly. We're headed for Le Mansk.
Hey, Stalker, we got a wild zoo here. We won't make it without you.
Here. We are at the bridge, waiting for mercenaries to arrive from the direction of the bandit camp anytime soon. Come back to the bridge. We need you here. It's going to get pretty nasty here before long.
The mercenaries we freed will help us clear out the bandits on the other side of that bridge we need to cross, and Clear-Sky are already there waiting for us as well. I didn't realize it at the time, but this is the upcoming final push. From this point, if we head forward, turning back isn't so easy. Similar to Shadow of Chernobyl, as we head towards the Brain Scorcher, both Clear-Sky and Shadow of Chernobyl both hit a point in which the open world becomes linear, and you're expected to follow a close path to the finale. I don't hate this design, the world is open and full of things to do, but when shit gets serious, you're expected to follow, and it flows relatively naturally, but could catch you off guard if you weren't wanting your game to end. Turning back after we cross this bridge isn't really viable, and in some ways becomes impossible at certain points. I think this was more common back in the 2000s, and these days most games would give you a pop-up saying, hey, no turning back after this point, do you want to continue? I both love and hate those moments. The completionist in me wants to know, the immersive gamer nerd doesn't. But in Stalker, it's risky, because I know I'm about to be fighting one of the largest military forces without time to restock. Returning to the bridge, we have a large set piece. Clear-Sky battling out against bandits over the river. Mercenaries appear on the other side to help us out and lower the bridge so we can get across. And eventually chase down Strelok, who is likely making his wish as we speak. This shooting section went on for a very, very long time. I think there may have been some bugged AI in there, an enemy that maybe got stuck and we couldn't see. Everyone just kept shooting even after the enemies were cleared out. Thankfully, the endless amounts of bandits do help me stock up on some ammo and health items before we move on. With the road to Le Mansk open, we get a small contingent of Clear-Sky fighters who will join us towards the city, where Strelok is located, and further on from there, the nuclear plant. Entering Le Mansk, we find a bandit watching over his dying partner. The Clear-Sky fighters threaten to put him down like a dog if they don't tell us what they know, but the bandit refuses without a medkit for his friend. I reluctantly hand one over to get an idea of what's ahead, and he marks our map. It's clearly been too long since I was robbed, and my hatred for them had somewhat dissipated. With only 4 Clear-Sky fighters and these 2 neutral bandits, the 19 humans I'm seeing on my minimap indicator tells me we're in for a slog of a fight. If you remember from my first video, the fight to the Brain Scorcher, the fight through Pripyat, and the nuclear plant, we're in for a similar situation here. Cautiously pushing forward, I'm able to snipe some bandits in their windows before stepping on a landmine? Right, let's avoid that by walking to the other side of the street. And shots in the windows. And another goddamn mine. And another. Thankfully, bandits aren't great shots, so the mine damage hits us, but we can continue on. We find a mercenary who is up ahead, stuck behind a machine gun nest. And now we see new enemies ahead. While we were fighting the bandits, they were also fighting Monolith. Monolith as a faction aren't widely discussed in Clear-Sky, but they're an almost religiously fanatical group who believe in the power of the Wish Granter. Although it's more likely they've had their consciousness altered to do the bidding of the sea consciousness entity at the heart of the zone, as we learned in Shadow of Chernobyl. Fighting through Monolith, we then come up against a group of military, held up in a house with another MG nest. Thankfully, the machine guns aren't too challenging to take down with a scoped weapon. I largely ignored the weapon mod system throughout Clear Sky, and didn't find much trouble, but it would have helped with some of the more accurate headshots I'm needing here. As with the first game, this is now a headshot shooting gallery. If you aren't hitting a head, you aren't doing it right. Past the military, we find a road filled with anomalies that block my path. Coming into contact with one will instantly teleport you back to the start of the road where the anomalies begin. And I get stuck in a loop. I can't see the path through. I can imagine how those mercenaries felt being stuck in their looped part of space. Any misstep sends me back, but there doesn't look to be a way in. Then I realized, I can jump into this bus. I would have liked to see some environmental design like this earlier in the game, to make some environments more dynamic, as it felt like an achievement when I realized. Up ahead, we reach a half-constructed multi-story building, and yep, that is 21 monolith boys we need to fight through. This is an absolute hornet's nest of enemies, and the most challenging part is that we only have one entrance in. This was quite a hard fight. Picking off enemies as I could, lobbing nades over the wall was a slightly viable strategy, but only netted me a couple of kills. The number of sightlines that could see the only way in made this quite the puzzle, especially as enemies are quick to aggro and decently accurate with their shots. It's at this point I was also starting to worry about my overall inventory. Much like Shadow of Chernobyl, the last linear levels are often a health kit check, and all this small chip damage has me thinking, will I have enough health kits to make it to the end? I do loot as I go, but obviously cut out most of that footage, but not every enemy has a health kit. I'm happy if I at least find a bandage here and there. As we finally make our way through the construction site, we get locked in a battle with more Monolith. They have snipers in the tower and an electric fence blocking our path. With some expert shots, we can take out the snipers, which limit the threat significantly, and as a parkour god, we make it to the higher ground, where the power is being siphoned, and make it through Limansk. The final push to the nuclear power plant brings us in close range. I like that this is a contrast to the wide open spaces we just fought through. I no longer have the benefit of ranged scope shots to pick heads out of the crowd. I'll be in close, taking down multiple monolith fighters and often taking much more damage. We find a group of Clear Sky fighters pinned by a machine gun and sniper. They tell me they're pinned and need someone to go around the back. They lay down covering fire as I move from point to point to be able to flank the bastards, but I realize this is a game. So I get a bit cheeky and decide to just kill the sniper and gunner with ranged weapons. This gives me a weird mission fail, but doesn't stop me continuing. Unfortunately, while moving up, I get myself flanked and go down, so we start it up again. And here it is. I run into my first inventory problem. A minor one, and hopefully not a sign of things to come. I've run out of bandages. Generally, when you're shot in Clear Sky, you'll get a small bleed. These can be fixed with a bandage, or some medkits can also fix it. I'm not 100% sure if they stop on their own after a period of time, but as I'm fighting through these halls, I run out of bandages. But we're so close to the end, and the rate at which bleeding saps your health is so minimal, we largely don't need to be concerned. There is also no ability to turn back now even if we wanted to, so we pray we can get through this. This is a weakness of the Stalker games. Setting up your player to be trapped in a long linear level with insane amounts of enemies will tax their resources. I think I'm a half decent shot and have been relatively stocked up, so I'm doing well managing ammo and health items, but for a player newer to shooters, this could become a tangled web of limited ammunition and health items requiring reloads whenever things go less than ideally. Our second time round, I flank the sniper as requested, and the Clear Sky fighters move up to grenade the machine gunner's position, allowing us to move forward into the next section, which is another long haul building with monolith fighters and a military helicopter that we hear fly into the combat zone. As I'm fighting for my life in a stairwell with enemies up and down, we get a red health bar that appears in the top right corner. Is this a boss fight? Who on earth are we taking down? Do you think it's Strelok? A monolith boss? A big ass mutant? Or a motherfucking helicopter? If you answered D, you are right. And what the fuck? Who fights the helicopter? Now, I had no clue what was happening. The health bar would do this weird up and down thing. My experience of helicopters in Stalker is that they're set pieces, not actual enemies. So after failing to find anywhere to exit the area, I start firing and see it takes damage. I'm still confused why its health bar occasionally filled and then emptied, but for whatever reason it is, the enemy is very weak, and we take it out almost instantly. I think this could have been an opportunity for better telegraphing. Having RPGs littered around the area would have made the fight make more sense to me, and it could have been a bit more of a set piece, but your boy just killed a heli, so let's ride that high because the ending is a little anticlimactic and it's right around the corner. After finishing off Monolith in the area, we get this brief cutscene as we enter the nuclear power plant.
To see you, man. We've done the impossible. We fought our way into the very center of the zone, to the power plant, and mostly thanks. Petrenko, get a scan of Strelok's PDA frequency.
Commander, Strelok is very close.
Lebedev, this is the recon squad. We got a visual on Strelok.
Merc, climb onto the heat pipeline and intercept Strelok. We'll cover you from the ground. Merc.
After this, we're thrust up onto one of the walkways nearby to the nuclear plant. Monolith teleporters seen across the power plant location, areas we explored in the first game. If you hadn't played Shadow of Chernobyl, this must be a bit of a weird sight. Portals? Since when did portals exist like this? And we're given a railgun with 100 shots? They don't give a fuck, we're getting it all. And another health bar, this time Strelok's. And hang on, how did Clear Sky have access to this railgun weapon? I believe they're called Gauss rifles in the game. In Shadow of Chernobyl, these were only handled by Monolith fighters, and you could get them, but they were a tech I thought unique to Sea Consciousness. I guess it's always possible that Clear Sky got their hands on one, so let's leave that possible plot hole issue. Strelok is fighting his way to the center of the power plant. His goal is to open the locked door hiding Sea Consciousness, but we don't technically know that as S.T.A.L.K.E.R. All we know is that he is likely to cause an emission if he gets too close, if Clear Sky to be believed. And if he makes it, Lebedev is worried that the zone will release an emission so intense it'll wipe out not only us, but half of those in the zone. We're told we need to get in close to remove his high protection, but that's not necessarily correct. We need to take his life bar down to 0. And while I take shots at him from our starting location with this awesome weapon, it's not terribly clear whether I'm doing the damage, or whether it's the anomaly he seems to have touched, or if it's the Monolith also taking shots at him. So we start to progress, and we alternate between being able to take shots at Strelok and needing to fight past Monolith hordes. In the first game, we experienced a similar portal and Monolith force, but here it's a little more unbalanced. Enemies will randomly teleport both in front of and behind me, and often my cover options are insanely limited as a result. So we end up taking the big L and go down. Our second time round, we get through the second portal faster to avoid those enemies spawning in behind me and get some really good damage on Strelok. Our shots are doing work. And then this ear-piercing audio bug. This made me jump out of my seat and may have given me permanent hearing loss in real life. This happens a couple of times in the final section, and it isn't game design. I dropped the audio significantly to give you an idea of what this sound is, but at full volume, it was intense. I also forgot about it, and had the lovely experience of getting blasted again while writing this script. I love you, Stalker, Clear Sky, never change. This is just an audio bug that is somewhat related to the portals, but I don't know exactly what triggered it. Having now played through both Shadow of Chernobyl and Clear Sky, it feels like the developers were unsure about how to bring an end to their games neatly. We have amazing open world experiences, which is where Stalker really shines, and even those linear underground levels full of atmosphere. It really does feel like a shame to end both games with a long linear shoot 'em up experience at the game's close. We go from having such freedom of choice to being part of what could essentially be an on-rails shooter. Now, most open world games do have to bring it linear for the finale, in part to prevent players accidentally ruining it by misstepping into another area and breaking a trigger, or for some other reason, but I think they could have toned down the length of time these sections run, as the combat really shows its age and the lack of finesse in these areas, and more so in Clear Sky, where enemy balance and accuracy is a little all over the place, especially when they frequently appear out of thin air. And the foreshadowing of the frequent grenades from earlier rears its ugly head. I'm all for enemies having access to grenades, but just look at this. I'm hidden behind a box, and there is nothing I could have done here. Additional context, that screen shake does impact your aim. Yep. On reloading and getting back to the same location, I then run into another foreshadowed event. I'm out of meds. I've been shot at constantly for literally an hour and 45 minutes. I'm not exaggerating. I went over all the footage from this section, and despite my few deaths, which set me back 5 minutes here and there, I've been in combat for 90 minutes at least, on a linear path to the end, with no option to turn back and get more medkits. I could have turned back early on, but after getting into Limansk, you do reach a hard line that you can't turn back from. It does feel like a poor design choice to have no traders in this final section. To be fair, I didn't check if any of the stalkers I met along the way could have traded some odds and ends with me, but they largely don't have much to offer. This was Lebedev, who I tried to trade with before embarking on our final mission. He had vodka, bread, and some kind of mystery meat. I also decided to go back and count how many enemies I faced, and this isn't exact, but after crossing the bridge, I believe I killed in the area of 120 enemies. It really is a meat grinder. The AI companions with you early on do very little, so consider that this is 120 enemies that were also taking shots at me, which leads to what happens now. Running completely out of meds. Now, this wasn't the end of the world. I am literally in the last section of the game, and only have a handful of enemies between me and Strelok. After dying, I took more care in killing enemies, and tried to eliminate all those behind me to avoid being shot in the back. But I again died to a grenade I had zero chance of avoiding. So I'm now in a phase of trial and error. Enemies spawn from portals, and I know which points trigger these portals, so I'm pre-lobbing grenades to catch them as they get to cover. And when I die again to more grenades that explode less than a second after landing in my crotch, I'm now starting to save scum. I clear a section with minimal health kits used, and I save. Up till now, I've not needed to engage in any fuckery that requires me to skirt the game's boundaries, or break the fourth wall, and breaking down what I imagine are the AI's rules of engagement, their game code. I'm now actively trying to understand the best options to exploit the game, which is an unfortunate failing in the last 15 minutes of the experience. Games should always present a challenge within the world and the tools to overcome them, and S.T.A.L.K.E.R has done this pretty successfully the whole way through despite some of my gripes. But here, it's stumbled. Enemies spawn endlessly in some areas and often behind me. They have great aim, but after 90 minutes of losing health slowly, I'm down to my last few health kits, and I'm constantly needing to dodge nades that I'm sure the best dodgeable teams in the world would have trouble with. But leaving cover often results in me taking significant bullet damage. I also can't get an angle on Strelok from here, so I must push forward. It's not viable to move out of cover with enemies ahead of you alive, as being shot reduces my move speed, which, as you guess, results in me taking more shots. Eventually we do break through. We can once again see Strelok, and he's making his way close to the plant's entrance. Now the ending is coming up fast, so as I finish off Strelok here, I'll give my final thoughts, a brief explanation of the ending, and I will let the final cutscene play as our outro. Lebedev thought stopping Strelok would prevent an emission, but as we take him down, radio chatter tells us this isn't the case. Anomalous activity begins to spike, and well, you'll see what happens next. If you watched Out of Chernobyl, you may have an idea. Stalker Clear Sky feels like it was pushed through to satiate a crowd hungry for another Stalker entry. Coming only a year and a bit after the release of the original game, it relies heavily on assets from the original and has done very little to set itself apart. Its story raised more questions for me than it answered, and was largely an unnecessary prologue. Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl is a story of a man with amnesia who was tasked with taking himself out. We learn at the end of the game that he was given this task by C Consciousness accidentally, so we already know that Strelok made it to the center, gets captured and sent back out. So there is very little tension in knowing what will happen when Strelok does reach the center and clear sky. The only question is, what happens to our character Scar? And we don't really get a clear answer on that. Clear Sky does do some work in helping us understand how Strelok did make it to the center of the zone, but raise those plot holes I discussed earlier. I enjoyed my time with Clear Sky, but its rushed story and limited additional storytelling has left me wanting. I think a more fleshed out main character in Scar, and possibly even meeting Strelok early in the story to fully understand his motivations, would have elevated this entry into the Stalker series to great heights. Instead, we end this game knowing it remains an awkward middle child that didn't quite receive enough attention and stands as a testament to great ideas squandered by a challenging release. So I leave you with Clear Sky's finale. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to help me out, please leave a like, subscribe for more, and if you have questions about this final cutscene, let me know in the comments below. Cheers.
Strelok's side protection has been disabled. That ought to stop you. Now we just wait and see what happens. How are the readings? Any drop in the level of anomalous activity?